Hi, this is Jenny Walterman, and this is my presentation for Module 6 on communicating and advocating for school community needs. And I just want to, from the get go, apologize for my speaking voice. I've been under the weather all week, and I will probably have to stop and cough throughout this. So I apologize in advance. Um, anyway, let's get started. This quote I pulled out from one of the articles. I thought it was a good place to start, stating communication, conversation, and relationships are the underpinnings of strong family school partnerships. So, based on that, um, I explored what some of the area districts' communication policies are and if they even have any on how to communicate with diverse families or under um, traditionally underrepresented um, cultures or families in communities. And I chose to explore my own district, which is Paola, and then some other surrounding districts. I would say Osawatomie and Lewisburg are very similar to Paola in size and demographics. Spring Hill is a little bit larger, but still only one high school at this time. But they do have more than one middle school and more than one elementary school. So a little bit bigger and slightly more diverse population. And then Olathe is to the north of us, about 25 miles, and it's a much larger school district in the city and has a much larger district. They have six high schools, um, over 20 middle schools, and I think 40 to 50 elementary schools. So a much larger district and a much more diverse population. So, in each of these, I'm going to briefly touch on it because I found a lot of identical information. Almost all of the districts had your typical Title I, Title IX, Section 504, and acceptable technology use policies. Their compliance of non discrimination and equal access statements, equal educational opportunity statements, and of course, the prohibition of harassment, discrimination, retaliation. So, in reference to Section 504, IDEA, and ADA, a lot of typical wording. I did spend a lot of time because the instructions said to do a deep dive. So I really did spend a large amount of time searching around, combing through board policies, district websites, and I just really could not find any kind of um, formally worded or even informally worded communication policies about how to communicate with diverse family groups and any kind of methodology or policies regarding that. And the same is true of Lewisburg. There was one message on the Rockville Elementary website where it talked about welcoming all members of the community, and a little bit about diversity and cultural acceptance. But other than that, it was all very much the same: Title I, Title IX, Section 504, acceptable technology use, MTSS, curriculum and instruction, a lot of the same. Osawatomie, who is also very similar to our district, a lot of the same. I did pull out for this one some wording from their textbook instructional materials section of their board docs, where it talked about students need to develop abilities in critical thinking, communication, mathematics, and science skills and information which helps students develop an appreciation of American cultural, ethnic, and racial diversity and balanced views concerning international, national, state, and local issues. And so I felt like that wording kind of was hinting at they want to include cultural and ethnic diversity into the curriculum materials. But again, that's not really a communication mantra to send out to buildings and faculty and staff about how we should be interacting and engaging with members of the community. And then Olathe, the much larger district. I did find a statement down here at the bottom where the reference is Olathe School News. There was a lot of stuff in their newsletter about cultural diversity. There were articles on diversity and inclusion included in this district newsletter. Topics included diversity, engagement, resource for families, intervention for students, about funding to access of mental health, and a statement of non-discrimination. There was equity and inclusion statements for creating equitable learning environments and improving programming practices around diversity. It was essentially, to me, some resources that families could have if they took the time to read the school newsletter, which I believe is sent out through email and posted on their website. But I, again, did not find any board policies about communication methods to members of the community or ELL families where English is not the native language. And then Paola, my district, had a lot of the typical same information about textbooks and instructional materials, very similar, almost identical wording to the Osawatomie quote that I read to you a minute ago. Information about their curriculum, selection criteria about how to choose materials that are culturally um, diverse, and of course, the standard acceptable use policy for technology, Title I, Title IX, Section 504, IDEA, and ADA, all of those. There was no mention of communication with families. There's no board policies regarding that engagement. And as to the why, I just um, throughout this whole course, I think that I've really noticed that there's a lack of policy on engagement, equity, diversity in our district. And honestly, I think it's just because it hasn't presented itself as a problem big enough for them to warrant addressing it yet. And that is not for me to say that it's not a problem. I just don't think it's on the board radar yet. I don't think they see our community, our farming community, as being diverse enough to need that yet. But I still feel like even if we don't have a bunch of culturally diverse um, members in our community, we still have a lot of diversity. We have people that live in town, we have very poor families. We have our farming community. And I think that there's still some efforts to be made there, but we aren't there yet as a district. I'm going to pause and take a drink of water. Okay. Sorry. So, getting into all of this about diversity and communication with families and what does the law say about it? We have our No Child Left Behind um, policy from 2000, and then it was revised in 2001, where it stated that family school relationship based on more than two-way communication is needed. It needs to also include collaboration. And so it needs to go beyond just your typical school to family newsletters or, letters home. And then the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, sorry, includes new provisions regarding family involvement and a shift in education policies towards parents being viewed as a vital role and in full partnership with schools. So we should embrace families as being part of the school process and communicate with them accordingly. And then, of course, in Title I and Title III under NCLB, which is No Child Left Behind, it states that schools have an obligation to inform parents and make an effort to communicate with underrepresented families and to involve them in school activities and also involve them in decision making. So, whether our board has written out policies or not, there is a need for us to make every effort that we're communicating in a way that is engaging families and meeting them where they are um, rather than just assuming families need to get on board with how our district and how our teachers are choosing to communicate with families, but we need to be an olive branch, reaching out and trying to engage as many families as possible. So, with that note, students will need more than just good teachers and smaller class sizes to meet the challenges of tomorrow. And that was a quote from Susan Castillo. And she was referencing that we need to do more than just have good teaching and small classrooms. We need to be communicating and really be a bridge that links home and classroom together for the best academic and holistic needs to be met in our students. So, benefits to communicating with our families, especially our culturally diverse families, is that it's going to provide effective communication that helps to inform and reassure and engage our families. It helps to establish and build strong partnerships between staff and families. It also ensures that accurate information is being shared and expectations are being set and shared. And it also can help trust to be established and make sure that the school and family are working together as a team. So, our methodology on diverse communication is a form of philosophy of practice that reflects the school's efforts to include families and incorporate their culture into the classroom by weaving the cultural factors, our decor, and lessons into the learning environment. So we need to adopt this methodology at Paola School District in order to embrace a more equitable and diverse communication with all families. This form of a philosophy of practice considers cultural identity, cultural diversity, and how we filter and interpret certain situations based on assumptions that we are making. That's our internal biases. And then we need to form a philosophy of practice that fosters a sense of community in the classroom and teaches students to value cultural diversity through daily activities and also through dialogue. I may not be able to talk through this whole thing. I'm sorry. So, training of faculty and staff is vital for effective communication to our diverse families and engagement. The Bodenhausen resource provided a plan that I really thought would be a helpful starting point for Paola School District. That is a cyclical process where it's just continuous, where you plan and then you do, and then you reflect, and then you adjust. And so, this plan for helping educators strengthen family engagement, like I said, is a cyclical process where you're working through it and always evaluating and adjusting, and then planning again. So, it's going to help build. I'm so sorry. I took a cough medicine to try to tame my cough, and it's making me yawn. Anyway. Building capacity for educators and families and using an equity lens to ensure engagement of all families. Um, these are benefits to this process. And then utilizing high leverage strategies and activities. And I will talk about the activities a little bit more in a little bit. And we need to agree on a vision statement as a school and as a district for family engagement. So I think, in addition to the plan do process, that there needs to be four essential core beliefs that we adopt and we have as part of our vision and goal for our district when we are engaging with families and ramping up more effective communication with our diverse families. And those core beliefs need to be that all families have dreams for their children and want the best for them. All families have the capacity to support their children's learning. We just need to come alongside them and help them with that capacity. Families and school staff are equal partners, And the responsibility for cultivating and sustaining partnerships among school, home, and community rests primarily with school staff, especially school leaders. So, this chart down here, I'll let you read it, but I'm not going to read it to you. But it talks about um, trusting relationships and connections to student learning, and what it looks like when there are weak trust and relationships between family and school, and strong. And then when there are weak connections to student learning versus strong. And you can take a minute to read those and pause if you wish. I'm going to move on. So, with communication and diversity, we need to ensure that our communication practices are sensitive to diverse languages and cultures and relate communication to cultural and community values, priorities, and commitments. We need to be sure to consider cultural preferences of communication. So, think about how our families and their cultural needs would be most comfortable with receiving communication. So, different forms of greeting might be considered. Use of preferred titles. Male and female roles in different cultures needs to be observed and respected. And then nonverbal communication and body language, such as eye contact, touching, and physical space, need to be studied, evaluated, and considered. And then we can just, as a great starting point, just ask questions. What's your preferred communication style? Do you prefer face to face, telephone, email? How do families prefer to be contacted? When we are making connections with diverse families, we need to get to know the families of the students. And we need to be aware of the diverse cultures in the community. We should adopt a strengths perspective as far as what the diversity and the cultures are bringing to our school, and focus on the strengths that's going to enhance our learning environment and enhance our school culture, and appreciate what our families and communities do know, even if it's something that we don't know, and not focus on what they don't know. We need to reflect on how cultures and backgrounds affect our interpreted experience and our own stories. That means that staff is going to need to check themselves and make a checklist to evaluate any biases that they might have internally, and then set those aside. Take a privileged walk to recognize subtle inequities that might be happening, and maybe keep a reflective journal as we're going through this process, and then participate in ongoing discussions that challenge assumptions. And I think some of our ongoing PD and training sessions where we're constantly bringing up questions and asking people to, discuss any reflective journal entries they made, or any um, internal bias observations that they made as we're going through this process. It's suggested that we should use a take home questionnaire at the beginning of the year, and to get some more information about the background of our students and their cultural home environment, and cultural diversity in that regard. Get to know families through back to school night, get to know them through community building activities, and also integrate the family and community members into our curriculum. Culturally sensitive communication is an important point to focus on when we're handling this training for the district. Um, right off the bat, I think a really big one is that we need to assume good intentions. Just because families aren't showing up to events does not mean they don't care about their children. And we need to assume that all parents do care about their children's education, and that they do want to help their student learn, but there might be some language or cultural barriers that are preventing the connection to actually click. And so we need to help bridge that gap. So if we approach all families as partners who want the best for their children, I think that will be a much better place to start. And then also, as part of that, we can invite parents and guardians to share their knowledge about their students' lives, invite them to share information about their family culture and traditions, Recognize and respect differences in family structures. What works for one family doesn't work for another, and there's no right or wrong. It's just different, and we need to respect that. Recognize the role that identity and background may play in shaping relationships between teachers and families, and bring a sense of self reflectiveness and cultural humility to all conversations and interactions. And then view linguistic, cultural, family diversity as strengths. When we're having difficult conversations with diverse families, this is going to happen. It's going to occur. It needs to happen. But we also need to take a beat, take a minute, and think about how we're going to have those conversations and how we're going to communicate and express care and concern so that we aren't offending families. These are difficult conversations, but it also provides us an opportunity to reach out to families that maybe don't engage with the school very often and show that we are um, really trying to help their student and that we care. We need to be aware of any misunderstandings that might occur due to different views and understandings of a situation. There might be a misunderstanding due to cultural interpretation or language barriers. So it's really important to consider multiple perspectives to situations. We need to take time to ask questions, show family support and respect for their perspective, and consistently observe and learn about both students and families. Remember that sharing concerns is a step to supporting the planning of progress for children. So, some tips for cross cultural communication: maintain etiquette, avoid any slang, speak slowly but not too slowly. You don't want to patronize the family, but you do want to make sure that you're being understood and give them time to process if they are trying to translate in their head from English to their native language. Keep your language and speaking style simple. Use smaller syllable words when possible. Don't use the largest word in your vocabulary. Practice active listening. Really listen and seek to understand what families are trying to say. Take turns to talk. Give them a fair chance to talk and pause and wait in case they are trying to translate and communicate in a language that's not their native language. You can even try to write things down and see if written word is a easier communication tool. Try to avoid closed questions that end in a yes or a no. Some cultures don't like to say no. That's a cultural thing. And so they will say yes, even if the answer is no. So try to ask an open ended question where they might provide you more information or speak to you more than just a simple yes no question. Um, be careful with humor. Not all humor is the same in all countries and cultures, and you don't want to offend a family. And then be as supportive as you can be. Let all of your language be supportive, which brings me back to assume the good. Make assumptions that the parents do care and do want to help their student. Don't assume the worst. So this is a bunch of communication techniques and strategies that you can use um, in classrooms and between teachers and between districts. Administrators can even use some of these strategies. Because of my cough and my cold, I am not going to read through the whole list, but you can pause and look at it if you want to. And then this is some technology information on communication. I will do some highlights here. Digital outreach helps parents stay informed. We know that. And more and more families are utilizing more electronic methods to communicate than handwritten notes or phone calls. So they actually prefer electronic forms of communication, but that doesn't mean all do. We can assume all of our family members have access to communication. So one of the articles did mention all of these ways to communicate electronically, but I would take that with a grain of salt and make sure that you do have a questionnaire at the beginning of the year and you ask parents how they want to be communicated with, and don't just do what's easiest for you. If you have two families that would prefer a phone call and everybody else wants an email, take the time to communicate with families in the way that they want to be communicated with. Show them that respect. But some of the communication methods that are electronic: Class Dojo, Spotlight, Remind, Seesaw, and GroupMe. Digital outreach helps parents stay informed if they don't have time to come up to the building. Um, and digital outreach allows parents to become more involved. I'll let you read the rest of this about technology. Okay, and this was a sample of a family engagement matrix based on the do, help, uh, revise, and refresh. So that whole cyclical process I talked about at the beginning, this is an example of strong and weak ways to communicate and different scenario examples there that you can read. But if you click on the Appendix B in the presentation here, there's tons of resources here in this appendix for different ways for teachers to interact and communicate with families. And if you go all the way down to Appendix B, I'm still going. Sorry, I should have pulled it up to go straight to that. But there's a lot of resources in here for all of our teachers. And I would really encourage, so Appendix B here, it's on page 46. So going through, there's just a lot of help and helpful hints and links, um, bringing attendance home, family engagement frameworks, handbook. On family and community engagement. Just a lot of great ideas, different surveys you can um, administer to get information from families. A whole section on understanding families. So, a lot of great resources here, information about two-way communication. And that's a great resource and tools that can be used in each of the buildings as we're working with teachers on family engagement and communicating in a way that is culturally sensitive and respectful of our diverse families. So, going on, these are my references from um, all of the resources I used, and I included all the districts that I researched. And thanks for watching. Again, sorry for my cold and my horrible speaking voice. I apologize.